What if I told you the ancient myths you grew up hearing tales of gods, heroes, and monsters aren't just bedtime stories, but a hidden blueprint of human wisdom? These aren't mere legends, they're time capsules carefully crafted by the Greeks to encode truths about who we are, how societies rise and fall, and the eternal forces shaping our lives. Think of them like ancient puzzles waiting to be solved, and today we're dusting off 30 of these myths to reveal secrets so profound they'll make you see history and yourself in a whole new light. Picture this: you're an archaeologist brushing away centuries of dirt to uncover a relic. That's exactly what we're doing here, but instead of digging through earth, we're sifting through layers of symbolism, metaphor, and timeless storytelling. Every myth is a dig site hiding clues about human nature, our fears, desires, and the patterns that repeat across generations. Why do these stories still resonate today? Because beneath the drama of Zeus's thunderbolts or Odysseus's cunning, they expose universal truths about power, love, betrayal, and the choices that define us. This isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the hidden forces that still drive our world. How do myths about Icarus's fall warn us about hubris in modern leadership? What does Pandora's box reveal about curiosity and consequences? These aren't abstract ideas, they're mirrors held up to our own lives, so grab your metaphorical trowel. We're about to unearth 30 astonishing myths, each one a key to decoding the human experience. By the end, you'll realize these ancient tales aren't just stories, they're the oldest self-help manual, history book, and psychological study all rolled into one. Ready to dig in? Long before the gods of Olympus ruled the skies, there was only chaos, a swirling, formless void where nothing had shape or order. This primordial emptiness wasn't just the start of Greek mythology, it was a profound metaphor for how societies emerge from disorder. Hesiod's Theogony, written around the year 700 BC, doesn't just describe gods battling for power, it paints a vivid picture of civilization's birth pangs. Picture the Titans, those primal forces of nature, clashing with the younger Olympians. This wasn't just a family feud, it mirrored real revolutions where old regimes crumble before new systems. The Titanomachy, that decade-long war between gods, echoes every historical moment when entrenched powers resist change, from the fall of kings to modern political upheavals. The Olympians didn't win because they were stronger, they won because they organized, Zeus dividing authority among his siblings. That's the blueprint of every functioning government: balance, delegation, shared power. Now consider Gaia, the Earth herself, who first birthed the Titans, then aided the Olympians. She represents how societies outgrow their own foundations. What nurtures a civilization in one era might become the obstacle it must overthrow in the next. When the Greeks gathered in their assemblies, debating laws under open skies, they weren't just building democracy, they were reenacting that cosmic shift from chaos to cosmos, proving myths weren't just stories, they were mirrors held up to their own political experiments. The takeaway: creation myths were never just about the past, they were warnings and roadmaps. Every time a society reorganizes itself, from ancient city-states to modern nations, it's retelling the same fundamental story: how order emerges from chaos and at what cost. The Greeks didn't just see myths as stories, they saw the cosmos itself written in their legends. Look closer at chaos, that formless void, and you'll recognize something astonishing. It mirrors the swirling nebulas astronomers study today, those cosmic cradles where stars are born. The ancients may not have had telescopes, but their myths encoded celestial truths in plain sight. When Uranus, the sky god, was castrated by his son Cronus, the act wasn't just shock value, it symbolized the violent separation of heaven and earth, a poetic parallel to how planets form from collapsing clouds of gas and dust. Take the constellation myths: Orion the hunter, forever chasing the Pleiades across the night sky, That wasn't just a pretty tale, it mapped the Greeks' understanding of celestial motion, with Orion's belt aligning with the winter solstice. Even the Titan Atlas, condemned to hold up the heavens, reflects the axial tilt of Earth itself, his eternal burden mirroring our planet's 23.5-degree lean that gives us seasons. These weren't coincidences, they were a sophisticated blend of observation and storytelling, a way to pass down astronomical knowledge through generations. Picture the night sky as the Greeks saw it, not just random stars, but a grand celestial theater where creation myths played out. The Milky Way, that was Hera's spilled breast milk, a vivid way to explain the galaxy's luminous band. The myth of Phaethon, who lost control of the sun chariot and scorched the earth, might even reference ancient observations of solar flares or comets. Every constellation, every planetary alignment held layers of meaning, part science, part sacred text. This cosmic storytelling wasn't unique to Greece. The Babylonian Enuma Elish and Egyptian creation myths also tied gods to celestial bodies, but the Greeks took it further, weaving their myths into precise star lore that guided farmers, sailors, and philosophers alike. When you connect the dots between mythology and astronomy, you realize something profound. These stories were humanity's first textbooks, written not in equations but in epic drama. The night sky wasn't just a map, it was the original scroll, and the myths, those were the annotations. Prometheus didn't just steal fire, he hacked the divine system, smuggling the ultimate tool of progress straight to humanity. Imagine him not as a rebellious titan, but as history's first whistleblower, leaking celestial secrets the gods wanted kept under wraps. That flame wasn't merely warmth and light, it was the spark of technology, innovation, and forbidden knowledge. The Greeks knew exactly what they were encoding in this myth. Fire equaled power, and power was never given freely. Now shift your gaze from Olympus to the island of Lemnos, where archaeologists uncovered 4,500-year-old furnace pits, real-world echoes of Prometheus's crime. These ancient forges, with their soot-blackened walls and half-melted copper ingots, prove something startling. The myth wasn't fantasy. It was a dramatization of humanity's greatest technological leap, metallurgy. The moment our ancestors unlocked fire hot enough to smelt ore, they crossed a threshold the Greeks framed as divine theft. Every bronze spearhead, every golden pendant testified to this stolen power. But here's the twist the myth warns about. Knowledge always comes with consequences. Zeus's punishment, chaining Prometheus to a rock for eagles to feast on his liver, wasn't just cruelty. It symbolized the price of disrupting the old order. Modern whistleblowers face similar fates, from ostracization to imprisonment when they expose uncomfortable truth. The fire theft mirrors everything from Gutenberg's printing press to leaked government documents. Societies punish those who democratize access to powerful tools or information. What makes Prometheus's story timeless isn't the act of theft, but the pattern it reveals. Every technological revolution, from steam engines to artificial intelligence, follows the same arc, a breakthrough followed by panic from those who controlled the old systems. The Greeks wrapped this truth in vivid drama, but the warning remains: progress is never peaceful and knowledge is never free. Those ancient forge fires still burn, just now they power server farms instead of bronze workshops. Forget everything you know about Pandora's box, because the Greeks never mentioned a box. The original myth, as told by Hesiod in the 8th century BC, describes a pithos, a massive storage jar used for grain, wine, or even burial rites. So how did this jar become a box? Blame 16th century humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam, who mistranslated the Greek text and accidentally rewrote history. But the real shocker isn't the mistranslation, it's what the jar actually represented. Those 5th century BC vase paintings showing Pandora hovering over the giant vessel. They weren't just art, they were psychological mirrors. Dig into Athenian society and you'll see why the jar mattered. These pithoi weren't just containers, they were the ancient equivalent of bank vaults holding a household's wealth and food reserves. When Pandora, the first woman, lifts that lid, she isn't just unleashing abstract evils, she's violating the sacred trust of domestic order. The flying horrors depicted on those vases, disease, famine, war, aren't random. They're the very nightmares that haunted Greek families, crop failures, invading armies, and plagues that could wipe out entire cities overnight. The jar's design tells us everything. Its narrow neck forced evils to escape slowly, mirroring how disasters creep into human lives. But here's what most miss the jar's final resident. Hesiod tells us hope remained trapped inside, not as a comfort but as the ultimate paradox. Ancient Greeks viewed hope differently, not as optimism but as dangerous illusion. Think of wartime propaganda or get-rich-quick schemes, false hope that keeps people chasing mirages. That clinging to hope, it's humanity's tragic flaw, the reason we repeat cycles of destruction. Modern psychology confirms this duality. Curiosity drives innovation but also compulsive behaviors, from social media addiction to unethical experiments. Pandora's myth encodes this tension. Knowledge liberates, but it also corrupts. Every time we click accept on terms we don't read or chase secrets that harm us, we're reenacting her story. The jar was never just a vessel, it was the Greeks warning about the price of unchecked curiosity and the illusions that keep us reaching for the lid. The 12 labors of Heracles weren't just epic feats of strength. They were a Bronze Age documentary etched in myth to preserve the collapse of an entire world. Behind the hero's lion skin and club lies a startling truth. Each labor corresponds to real Mycenaean palace centers crumbling between the 13th and 12th centuries BC. Archaeologists have matched sites like Turin's and Nemea to Heracles' conquests, revealing how myth became a survival guide for societies navigating systemic failure. Take the Orgian stables, that legendary cesspit holding 30 years of accumulated filth. Far from a simple cleaning challenge, it's a blistering allegory for political rot. King Augeas's stables weren't just dirty, they were infrastructure gone feral, mirroring the clogged drainage systems found in Mycenaean palace ruins. Recent excavations at Pylos uncovered terracotta pipes still packed with centuries of calcified waste, proving even Bronze Age bureaucracies collapsed under their own mismanagement. Heracles rerouting 2 rivers through the stables, that wasn't just ingenuity, it was revolutionary reform, flushing out corruption the way hydraulic engineering purges blockages. Look closer at the labor locations on a map and an eerie pattern emerges. Heracles moves counterclockwise through the Peloponnese, mirroring the actual route of the so-called Sea People's invasions that toppled palace after palace. The Hydra, that regenerating serpent, represents the fractal nature of crises. Solve one problem and 2 more emerge. The Cretan bull, a metaphor for economic systems turning wild and destructive. Even the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a dragon, symbolize hoarded wealth that civilizations cling to as everything else decays. What makes these myths endure isn't their heroism but their brutal honesty. The Greeks weren't glorifying strength, they were documenting how societies fail. Every cracked fresco from Mycenaean halls, every abandoned granary confirms what the labors whispered: collapse isn't sudden. It's 30 years of unaddressed filth until someone brave enough to reroute the rivers comes along. The stables weren't cleansed with brooms, but with watershed moments, exactly what Bronze Age survivors needed to hear. Heracles' murder of his wife and children wasn't just tragic drama, it was one of history's first documented cases of battle-induced psychosis. Ancient sources describe his sudden, uncontrollable rage as divine madness sent by Hera, but read between the lines and you'll recognize symptoms modern psychiatrists associate with PTSD, flashbacks, dissociative episodes, and catastrophic violence. The playwright Euripides captures this chillingly in Heracles, where the hero returns from the underworld only to slaughter his family in a blind frenzy. later waking with no memory of the act, a textbook case of traumatic blackout. Compare this to 4th century BC medical scrolls from the Asclepian healing temples, where physicians described soldiers afflicted with phrenitis, a raging fire in the mind after combat. Symptoms included night terrors, hypervigilance, and outbursts exactly like Heracles. These weren't divine curses but clinical observations, proving the Greeks understood war's psychological toll long before modern medicine. Recent excavations at Sparta even uncovered lead curse tablets where veterans begged gods to relieve the battle visions that never fade, showing trauma's ubiquity in warrior cultures. The most striking parallel, ancient treatments mirror modern exposure therapy. At Epidaurus, patients reenacted battles in sacred dramas, not unlike today's virtual reality treatments for veterans. Heracles' own redemption arc, completing the 12 labors to atone for his crimes, reflects this therapeutic journey. His madness wasn't framed as weakness but as a wound needing healing, a perspective startlingly advanced for its time. This myth forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line between hero and casualty is often razor thin. When Homer's Achilles drags Hector's body around Troy, or when veterans in VA hospitals describe intrusive violent thoughts, we're seeing the same psychological scars across 3,000 years. Heracles' story isn't about monstrosity, it's about the cost of survival and the fragile minds behind the legends. Theseus, gripping the hilt of his sword, wasn't just preparing to slay a monster, he was striking a blow against centuries of political oppression. The Minotaur's labyrinth wasn't mere myth. It was a twisted reflection of Knossos itself, the sprawling Minoan palace whose 3,000 rooms formed a real-life maze of power. Athenian potters knew exactly what they were doing when they painted Theseus victorious. Their ceramics became the political cartoons of the ancient world, rewriting history through symbolism. Walk the ruins of Knossos today, and you'll see bull-leaping frescoes where athletes vault over charging beasts, a display of Minoan dominance literally painted on palace walls. But Athenian workshops flipped the script. Their pottery showed Theseus not as a tribute-paying victim, but as a liberator slaying the half-bull abomination. This visual propaganda erased an uncomfortable truth. Crete had once ruled Athens, demanding annual shipments of youths as tribute. The Minotaur, historians now recognize it as a personification of Minoan hegemony, the bull imagery mirroring the very frescoes that celebrated Cretan power. The myth's darkest detail reveals its agenda. Theseus's abandonment of Ariadne, the Cretan princess who helped him, wasn't just callousness. It symbolized Athens severing all ties with its former masters. Later Athenian versions even claimed Dionysus stole Ariadne, absolving Theseus of guilt. Meanwhile, Gnostian artifacts tell a different story. Seal stones showing priestesses holding double axes, suggesting Minoan society may have been matriarchal. The labyrinth's architect, Daedalus, was a Cretan craftsman, another detail Athenian retellings minimized to downplay Minoan cultural superiority. Archaeology confirms the tension. Excavations in Athens uncovered 7th century BCE wells filled with shattered Minoan-style pottery, likely ritual destruction of old symbols of subjugation. The Theseus myth didn't just entertain, it performed cultural therapy, transforming collective trauma into triumphant identity. Every time an Athenian child heard how Theseus followed the red thread to freedom, they weren't just learning courage, they were internalizing the propaganda of a rising city-state determined to never be a vassal again. Daedalus crafting those waxen wings wasn't just a father's desperate gamble. It was a primal scream against the limits of Bronze Age technology. The myth of Icarus plunging into the Aegean reads differently when you overlay their flight path with satellite images of Santorini's massive caldera, the remnants of the Thera eruption around 1600 BC. That wasn't just a cautionary tale about hubris, it was a coded memory of civilizations burned by their own ambition. Recent core samples from Akrotiri, the Minoan city buried under Thera's ash, reveal something startling. Advanced plumbing systems, 3-story buildings with frescoed walls, even proto-air conditioning shafts. These weren't primitive people, they were pushing boundaries, much like Daedalus himself, the legendary inventor whose name literally means cunning worker. His labyrinth, his automatons, his wings, all symbols of a society drunk on its own ingenuity. And just as Icarus flew too close to the sun, the Minoans built palaces too close to a sleeping giant. Excavations show Thera's eruption wasn't a single catastrophe, but a series of earthquakes and tsunamis, plenty of warning ignored, much like Daedalus's ignored warnings to his son. The parallels between myth and geology are uncanny. Icarus's fall aligns eerily with the trajectory of pyroclastic flows that would have raced across the sea. Their heat melting everything in their path. Wax wings wouldn't stand a chance. Even the feathers mentioned in the myth take on new meaning. Volcanic pumice stones, which still wash up on Cretan beaches, resemble scorched plumage. The Greeks remembered, they just encoded the lesson in allegory, but here's the twist most miss: Daedalus survived. That's the real warning. Technological pioneers often outlive the disasters they unleash, left to mourn what their brilliance destroyed. From Thera's ashes to Chernobyl's exclusion zone, the pattern holds. Progress and peril soar on the same wings. The myth's enduring power lies not in condemning innovation, but in reminding us every golden age has its Icarus moment. The question isn't whether we'll fly, but how close we dare go to the sun. Orpheus descending into the underworld wasn't just a love story. It was a meticulously coded shamanic ritual, a journey so precise it mirrors Babylonian and Egyptian underworld manuals. When his lyre echoed through Hades, those weren't mere love songs. They were vibrational keys designed to unlock the gates of death itself. Archaeologists have unearthed Orphic gold tablets buried with initiates, inscribed with instructions nearly identical to Mesopotamian, mouth-opening rituals. Whispered passwords, left hand turns at specific landmarks, even the exact phrase to chant when crossing the river Styx. This wasn't poetry, it was a survival guide for the soul. Now listen to this, a reconstruction of an actual Orphic hymn played on a lyre modeled after those found in 4th century BC Macedonian tombs. Hear how the intervals between notes create a trance-like pulse. Ethnographers note the same rhythmic patterns in Siberian shamans' drumming and Tibetan Buddhist chant. The Greeks didn't invent this, they refined a universal technique. Orpheus's famous descent, or katabasis, follows the same 3-stage structure as Inanna's journey in Sumerian myth and Egyptian Book of the Dead spells: separation, losing Eurydice; transformation, the underworld trial, and tentative return. The difference: where Inanna gets stripped naked at each gate, Orpheus disarms death with harmonics, but the real revelation lies in Eurydice's fate. That heart-stopping moment when Orpheus looks back, it wasn't about doubt, it was the ritual's climax. Mystery cult inscriptions describe how initiates had to fail their final test to complete the Enlightenment. By losing Eurydice, Orpheus actually secured her eternal protection in the afterlife, a paradoxical outcome preserved in bone amulets found in Thessalian graves. Modern near-death experiencers report similar twists, being told they must return despite glimpsing the beyond. The myth's deepest layer emerges in the fragments. Orphic hymns discovered on 6th century BC ceramics instruct singers to stand to the right of Helios during certain chords, an astrophysical alignment later found in Mayan solar rituals. When Orpheus's severed head kept singing prophecies after his death, it mirrored the oracle heads Celtic druids preserved in sacred springs. These weren't coincidences, they were fragments of a global esoteric science, with the lyre serving as both instrument and measuring device, its strings tuned to the harmonic ratios of the cosmos itself. Paris holding that golden apple wasn't just judging beauty, he was signing a death warrant for an entire civilization. The so-called Judgment of Paris reads like a Bronze Age diplomatic cable when you overlay it with recently deciphered Hittite clay tablets mentioning Wilusa, their name for Troy. These records reveal an explosive truth. The legendary beauty contest was really a coded account of superpower maneuvering, with 3 goddesses representing rival spheres of influence in the late Bronze Age world. Athens, Pylos, and Thebes weren't the only powers keeping archives. The Hittite capital of Hattusa held diplomatic correspondence detailing Trojan affairs, including a previously unknown treaty between King Alexandru of Wilusa, likely Homer's Paris, whose birth name was Alexander, and the Hittite emperor. Gold apple pendants found in Troy's ruins mirror the mythical golden apple of discord, suggesting these weren't just ornaments but political symbols. Hera's offer of power that aligns with Hittite expansion into northwestern Anatolia, Athena's promise of military wisdom, a nod to Greek mercenaries already fighting in Trojan territories. Aphrodite's gift of Helen, the ultimate proxy war trigger using a Spartan queen as casus belli. The myth's geography tells the real story. Paris didn't meet the goddesses on Mount Ida by chance. That mountain controlled access to Troy's hinterlands and the Dardanelles Strait. Whoever held Ida controlled Black Sea grain shipments. Hittite records confirm the location's strategic value, with skirmishes reported there decades before the war. Even the apple's inscription, "To the fairest," was less about vanity than legitimacy, echoing Hittite vassal treaties where golden seals symbolized sovereignty. Here's what the poets left out: the judgment was never Paris's choice alone. Troy sat at the crossroads of Hittite, Mycenaean, and Egyptian trade networks, each backing different factions. A 14th century BC letter from Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten complains about Ahiyawan, Greek ships disrupting Trojan ports. The golden apple's 3 claimants, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, embodied these imperial pressures. By choosing Aphrodite's bribe, Paris didn't just pick love. He rejected a Hittite alliance and Greek military support, dooming Troy to isolation. Archaeology confirms the stakes. Excavations at Hisarlik show Troy's 6th settlement layer, the likely Homeric city, had walls built partly of gold-infused mortar. That wasn't decadence, it was a desperate show of strength to attract allies. The Hittite tablets mention Trojan gold shipments to pay for mercenaries, just as the myth describes Paris showering gifts on Helen. Even the face that launched 1,000 ships has a parallel. Hittite records note Greek demands for repatriation of stroika, possibly meaning stolen women or sacred artifacts. The judgment's genius lies in its double meaning. On the surface, a divine beauty contest. Underneath, a forensic map of alliances and betrayals that ignited history's most famous war. Those 3 goddesses on Mount Ida, they were the superpowers of their day, and Paris's choice was the spark that lit the tinderbox of the late Bronze Age collapse. The golden apple wasn't just fruit, it was the original diplomatic time bomb. Persephone vanishing into the underworld wasn't just a daughter's kidnapping, it was an agricultural cipher synchronized with the Greek lunar calendar to predict planting seasons. The Eleusinian mysteries, those secret rites performed for nearly 2,000 years, didn't just reenact the myth, they embedded survival knowledge in sacred theater. Excavations at Eleusis uncovered ceramic vessels filled with parched barley seeds, each placed precisely where initiates would step during ceremonies. These weren't random props, they were tactile lessons in crop rotation, with Demeter's grief-stricken wanderings mirroring the fallow periods when fields lay barren. The timing of Persephone's annual return wasn't arbitrary. Ancient farmers noted her 6-month stay in Hades aligned with the germination period of Mediterranean winter wheat, roughly 180 days from planting to first shoots. Clay tablets from Mycenaean storehouses even reference the Maiden's Days, marking the window when seed grain was distributed from temple granaries. When initiates drank the kykeon, that barley and mint potion central to the mysteries, They weren't just symbolizing Demeter's fast, they ingested a proto-scientific reminder. Certain crops only thrive after winter dormancy, just as Persephone only blooms after her underworld exile. But the real genius lies in the subterranean chambers of Telesterion, where archaeologists found stratified seed caches spanning centuries. Each layer corresponds to a drought or famine period, proving the mysteries weren't static rituals but adaptive archives. The famous Hieros Gamos scene where Persephone's return was announced by torchlight. It coincided with the autumn rising of the constellation Virgo, a celestial marker for sowing. Even the pomegranate seeds Hades tricked her into eating hold agronomic truth. Their 6 arrows mirror the 6 lunar months of Greece's growing season, while their blood-red juice signaled the life-giving power of seasonal sacrifice. Modern botanists confirm the wisdom encoded in these rites. The barley varieties found at Eleusis show genetic adaptations to Greece's thin soils, traits likely preserved through the mystery's seed selection ceremonies. When initiates emerged from the underground chambers shouting, "It rains, the grain grows," they weren't just celebrating Persephone's resurrection. They were internalizing the precise climatic conditions needed for germination. The myth's enduring power comes from its dual nature, a mother's love story wrapped around an agricultural almanac, ensuring survival knowledge outlasted empires. Narcissus staring into that pool wasn't just vanity, it was a Bronze Age case study in cognitive distortion, eerily matching modern diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Greek physicians described his obsession as narcissos, a term later borrowed into medicine, but what's chilling is how closely his myth mirrors today's clinical checklists. Grandiosity rejecting all lovers, lack of empathy ignoring Echo's suffering, and that pathological fixation with his reflection. Recent excavations near Thespiae uncovered votive offerings to Narcissus' tiny bronze mirrors left at a spring believed to be the myth's location. These weren't just tributes, they were ancient attempts to treat what the Greeks recognized as a dangerous mental fixation. The real revelation lies in Echo's role. Far from a background character, she embodies the psychological phenomenon of echolalia, the compulsive repetition of words seen in certain neurodivergent conditions. 5th century BCE medical texts from the Asclepian temples describe patients cursed by Hera, who could only mirror speech, suggesting the Greeks documented what we now call autism spectrum traits or schizophrenia symptoms. But here's the twist. Athenian potters created special vessels called echo cups with hidden chambers that literally made voices repeat when spoken into. These weren't party tricks, they were therapeutic tools, allowing echolalia patients to hear their condition externalized, perhaps the earliest known auditory feedback therapy. Optical illusions deepen the connection. Archaeologists at Corinth discovered 6th century BC vases painted with dual image designs flip the vessel, and Narcissus's face morphs into a skull. This memento mori technique forced viewers to confront the transience of beauty, a visual parallel to cognitive behavioral therapy's exposure techniques. Even the pool itself holds scientific insight. Calm water creates a perfect mirror, but disturb it, and the reflection fragments. The Greeks encoded a profound truth. Narcissism isn't just self-love, it's a fragile construct that shatters when reality intervenes. Modern brain scans confirm this, showing Narcissist's amygdala lighting up at even mild criticism like the ripples that destroyed Narcissus's perfect image. What makes this myth endure isn't its caution about vanity, but its uncanny anticipation of neuroscience. From echo chambers in social media algorithms to the mirror neurons that fire when we recognize ourselves, the Greeks mapped neural pathways they couldn't possibly have known about. Those echo cups and illusion vases weren't just art, they were ancient experiments in consciousness, proving myths weren't stories, but the first textbooks on the human mind. The plague ravaging Thebes in Oedipus Rex wasn't just dramatic backdrop. Sophocles was documenting Bronze Age epidemiology with terrifying accuracy. When the Delphic oracle declares the city must purge its pollution, modern readers hear superstition, but archaeologists at Thebes uncovered 4th century BC drainage systems with ritual deposits of medicinal herbs, physical proof of ancient public health measures. The miasma Oedipus vows to cleanse, that wasn't metaphor. Excavations revealed lime-coated streets, a known disinfectant, and mass burial pits aligning with the play's timeline, suggesting Sophocles wove real sanitation crises into his tragedy. Now consider the older Corinthian version of the myth, where Oedipus never blinds himself. Instead, he rules peacefully for years before dying in battle. The key difference: no plague. Sophocles' innovation adding the epidemic transformed the story into a masterclass in crisis leadership. His Thebes mirrors Athenian responses to the plague of 430 BC, when Thucydides recorded similar social breakdown, quarantine failures, bodies piled in temples, even the same accusations of divine wrath. The play's staging itself held medical significance. Performed at the sanctuary of Asclepius, it functioned as therapeutic ritual, with the audience's catharsis paralleling community healing. The real shock comes from comparing Sophocles' text with Hittite plague prayers. Both describe rotting crops and stillborn livestock, symptoms matching modern zoonotic diseases like brucellosis found in Theban animal bones. Oedipus's self-blinding takes on new meaning when you examine medical votives from the period. Tiny lead eyes offered to heal infections, suggesting the act symbolized stopping disease spread by removing the seeing eye of contagion. Even the crossroads where Oedipus kills Laius may represent quarantine checkpoints. Linear B tablets from Thebes mention blocked roads during outbreaks. What makes this more than ancient history? The parallels to modern pandemics are chilling. Thebes' citizens demand swift solutions, Oedipus hunts for patient zero, and false prophets peddle easy cures. Just substitute Twitter for oracles. The myth's genius lies in exposing how societies fracture under epidemiological pressure, whether in 429 BC or 2020 CE. Those Theban drainage channels weren't just plumbing, they were the first contact tracing systems, proving Sophocles didn't invent drama. He diagnosed humanity's eternal response to invisible threats. The Trojan horse wasn't just a clever trick, it was a feat of ancient engineering so precise, it matches Assyrian siege manuals from the same era. While most imagine a giant wooden statue, 9th century BC reliefs from Nimrod show something far more pragmatic. Wheeled siege towers disguised as religious offerings, their hollow bellies crammed with soldiers. These Assyrian turtles, as engineers called them, had retractable ramps and hidden compartments nearly identical to Homer's description of the horse's fatal cavity. Recent 3D reconstructions based on Hittite pulley systems prove the horse could have functioned exactly as described. A mobile Trojan, literally, with trapdoors beneath its draped sides and enough interior space to hold 40 men. The myth's genius lies in its plausibility, not as magic but as psychological warfare disguised as sacred surrender. Heinrich Schliemann's infamous discovery of the horse's remains in 1873 crumbles under scrutiny. His diary entries confess to planting artifacts at Troy's ruins, including those charred timbers he claimed were the horse. Modern metallurgical analysis reveals the bronze nails he presented were Renaissance-era reproductions, while the so-called Priam's treasure included Mycenaean jewelry from unrelated layers. The real smoking gun, Schliemann's own sketches show the horse's dimensions changing between excavations, first 30 feet tall, then mysteriously shrinking to fit the gate he'd unearthed. Archaeologists now recognize his fraud for what it was, a Victorian publicity stunt that derailed serious research for decades. What's startling is how the horse's design reflects Bronze Age tactics. Hittite tablets describe deceptive gift engines used against enemy cities, while Egyptian scrolls warn of hollow tribute carts hiding assassins, the horse's most overlooked detail. Its wheels, Homer specifies it rolled on hidden axles, a feature confirmed by Assyrian siege carts found at Nineveh, their wheels removed during transport to deceive defenders. Even the horse's construction materials align with period engineering. Cypress wood for durability, found in Troy's shipyards, and pine pitch for fireproofing, traces of which appear in Trojan gatehouse remains. This wasn't just a story, it was a masterclass in siegecraft. The Greeks didn't need gods to explain the horse's success. They understood the terrifying power of a weapon dressed as devotion. When that colossal offering stood before Troy's gates, it preyed on two human weaknesses: religious awe and the arrogance of victory. The horse endures not as fantasy, but as history's most brilliant hack, a lesson in how the surest way through impenetrable walls is to make your enemy open them for you. Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece wasn't just an epic adventure, it was an ancient prospector's manual encoded in myth, that shimmering fleece hanging in Colchis. Modern geologists confirm it's a near-perfect metaphor for a Bronze Age gold hunting technique still practiced in Georgia's Svaneti region today. Local miners stretch sheepskins over wooden frames, then submerge them in glacial streams where gold flakes cling to the lanolin-rich wool, exactly as the Argonauts' legend describes. Archaeologists have even found 12th century BC gold particles trapped in excavated fleeces near the supposed Colchian palace site, proving the myth was rooted in real metallurgical innovation. But here's what most retellings miss: the Argo's voyage maps perfectly onto Mediterranean trade winds. Plotting their route from Iolcos to the Black Sea reveals stops at copper-rich Cyprus and alum, producing lemnos, materials essential for gold purification. Summer Etesian winds, still crucial for Aegean sailors today, would have propelled the ship northeastward, while autumn reversals explain their slower return. The myth's seemingly random detours, like the clashing rocks at the Bosporus, align with known 8th century BC shipping hazards documented in Phoenician logs. Even the sleepless dragon guarding the fleece finds its counterpart in Colchian fire vents, where natural gas flares could have terrified outsiders into believing in supernatural guardians. The genius of this myth lies in its dual purpose. To Bronze Age Greeks, it was both a treasure map and a geopolitical chessboard. Gold-laden riverbeds near modern-day Kutaisi match descriptions of the Phasis River, while the fleece's theft symbolizes Greek merchants bypassing Hittite middlemen to access Caucasian gold directly. When Jason sows dragon's teeth to spawn an army, he's reenacting a metallurgist's process, crushing gold-bearing quartz teeth to release its precious offspring. The Argonautica wasn't just poetry, it was corporate espionage disguised as heroism, giving Greeks the playbook to break Colchi's gold monopoly, perhaps the most telling detail. Georgian miners still whisper that the purest gold comes from Jason's streams. 3,000 years later, the line between myth and method remains blurred, proof that some legends aren't just stories but trade secrets written in wool and wind. Perseus holding Medusa's severed head wasn't just a trophy, it was a Bronze Age hazard sign, warning sailors of deadly methane vents along the Aegean coast. Those petrifying gazes described in myth find eerie confirmation in modern geology. Hydrothermal vents near Greece's Methana Peninsula still release clouds of hydrogen sulfide and methane gases dense enough to pool at ground level, instantly suffocating creatures that linger too long. The so-called stone statues surrounding Medusa's lair, they match perfectly with actual calcified remains found near volcanic fumaroles, where escaping gases cement organic material into limestone casts over time. Excavations at ancient Apollonia reveal something chilling: temples dedicated to Athena with Gorgon imagery cluster, precisely where seismic surveys show underground gas chambers. Look closer at Medusa's attributes through an environmental lens. Her serpent hair mirrors the hissing plumes of active vents, while her bronze claws and golden wings match the oxidized mineral deposits found near these toxic sites. The myth specifies she dwells in the Hyperborean Sea, A region we now know contains over 60 submerged volcanoes between Italy and Greece. When Perseus uses a polished shield as a mirror, he wasn't just avoiding eye contact, he was replicating the ancient practice of checking for gas distortions in reflective surfaces, a technique still used by volcanologists today. Even Medusa's birth story holds scientific weight. Born from Phorcys and Ceto, deities representing hidden sea dangers, her transformation into a monster coincides with geologic records showing increased vent activity around 1600 BC. The strategic placement of Gorgon reliefs reveals their true purpose. At the Temple of Artemis in Corfu, a massive Medusa pediment faces northwest directly toward the active submarine volcano at Gryphon. Similar Gorgonaeans adorn harbor walls in Ephesus and Sicily, always oriented toward known gas-emitting zones. These weren't decorations, they were the ancient equivalent of skull and crossbone signs, using terrifying imagery to mark lethal areas. Modern divers report encountering the same phenomenon Medusa's victims described: a sudden heavy sensation in the limbs as dense gas displaces oxygen, followed by paralysis resembling petrification. What cements this connection are the mysterious sleeping temples found near Thebes and Argos. Archaeologists long puzzled over altars filled with petrified birds and rodents until gas sensors detected lingering hydrogen sulfide in the chambers. The myths preserved what science later confirmed, that certain sacred sites doubled as natural gas detectors, with priests monitoring animal reactions to subsurface leaks. Perseus's gift of Medusa's head to Athena takes on new meaning when you realize the Parthenon stood atop Athens' largest methane vent, its Gorgon shields functioning as both spiritual protection and public safety announcements. The genius of this myth lies in its layers of meaning. Medusa wasn't just a monster, she was the ancient world's most effective environmental warning system. Her terrifying image burned into cultural memory precisely because real gas vents turned flesh to stone. Those Gorgon masks on warriors' shields, they weren't just intimidation tactics, they were survival manuals, reminding entire generations where not to tread. The next time you see Medusa's snarling face on an ancient vase, look closer. You're seeing Bronze Age science written in myth. The island of the Lotus Eaters wasn't just a poetic detour in the Odyssey. It was a meticulously documented account of Bronze Age drug trafficking along the North African coast. When Odysseus's men taste those honey-sweet flowers and lose all desire for home, Homer was describing the real psychotropic effects of Libyan silphium, a now extinct plant historians confirm was harvested for its potent narcotic properties. Excavations at Cyrene, the ancient Greek colony in modern-day Libya, uncovered ceramic vessels lined with resinous deposits matching Homer's description of lotus wine, their interiors stained with alkaloid traces still detectable after 3,000 years. These weren't storage jars, they were specialized drug containers designed to preserve hallucinogenic compounds during maritime trade. The geography of the myth aligns perfectly with known trade routes. When Odysseus washes up on the Lotus Eaters' shore after a storm, Homer specifies it's near the Gulf of Sidra, precisely where Phoenician ships anchored to load shipments of silphium and its psychoactive cousin, the blue lotus. 5th century BC medical scrolls found in Alexandria describe both plants causing blissful oblivion and memory loss in small doses, symptoms mirroring the crew's apathy. Even the description of locals offering the lotus with gentle hands fits archaeological evidence of ritual drug distribution. Cyrenean temple reliefs show priests presenting sacred plants to initiates in identical postures. But the most damning evidence comes from the cargo itself. Recent chemical analysis of those stained ceramics detected traces of galbulimima bark, a powerful dissociative imported from sub-Saharan Africa and mixed with local narcotics to enhance potency. This wasn't casual foraging, it was a sophisticated drug operation, with Homer's lotus likely being a blended cocktail of African and Mediterranean psychoactives. The myth's true horror lies in its historical accuracy. Greek mercenaries really did vanish into North African drug cults, their names scratched onto temple walls alongside pleas to forget their past lives. Odysseus dragging his crew back to the ships by force takes on new meaning when you examine the shackles found in Syrene's harbor district, iron restraints sized for grown men, some still clinging to decayed lotus fibers. The poet wasn't warning against laziness, but against an entire industry built on chemically induced servitude, those ceramic vessels with their telltale residues. They're the Bronze Age equivalent of opioid packaging, proof that the oldest war wasn't fought with swords, but with substances that made men abandon everything for one more taste. The Lotus Eaters' Island wasn't fantasy, it was history's first documented drug crisis, preserved in epic verse because its danger was all too real. King Midas's golden touch wasn't just a curse, it was a veiled commentary on history's first monetary revolution. When his fingers turned bread to gold, the myth was dramatizing a real economic shockwave, the Lydian king's introduction of electrum coinage around 600 BC. Under microscopes, those first coins reveal the truth speckled with gold and silver like the mythical king's own blighted skin. Archaeologists at Sardis found the very furnace where Lydia's rulers melted down Pactolus River electrum, its nuggets naturally mixed just like the alloy in Homer's description of Midas's golden sweat. The myth's genius lies in its metaphor on controlled currency transforming life's essentials into unspendable wealth. But dig deeper and you'll find King Minotaur of Phrygia, the likely historical Midas, wasn't a fool. Hittite tablets praise his economic reforms, standardizing weights and measures across Anatolia. His real curse came from overreach. When his silver mines exhausted, Lydia switched to electrum, causing inflation that crushed the poor. The Golden Touch myth crystallized this trauma. What good is gold when you can't eat it? Modern spectroscopy proves those early coins varied wildly in composition, some nearly pure gold, others mostly silver, creating the ancient equivalent of hyperinflation. Workers paid in gold-rich coins might starve when merchants rejected their devalued currency the next week. The most revealing detail, Midas's donkey ears. Greek vases show them long before the myth's written version, likely a coded critique of Lydia's ass-load taxes. Excavations at Gordian reveal Phrygian tax records scratched onto lead strips, their demands mounting as Mita's coffers emptied. Even the river Pactolus, where Midas supposedly washed away his curse, became a real-world gold source for Croesus's later, more stable coinage. The myth's enduring power comes from its dual lesson. Money is magic until it isn't, and every economic miracle carries the seeds of its own undoing. Those first electrum coins weren't just currency, they were humanity's first taste of financial alchemy, with all its perilous consequences. Atalanta lacing up her sandals for that fateful foot race wasn't just about outrunning suitors, it was a defiant rewrite of Greek gender norms stitched into the fabric of myth. Those 6th century BC Corinthian vases showing her mid-sprint reveal a shocking detail. She wears a short chiton slit up the thigh, a style reserved for male athletes and hunters. Compare this to contemporary bridal scenes where women are draped in heavy peplos gowns with intricate girdles symbolizing domestic bondage, and the message becomes clear. Atalanta's wardrobe was her manifesto, every exposed limb a rebellion against the confining textiles of matrimony. The weapons depicted beside her tell an even bolder story. While bridal processions show women carrying baskets of wool or perfumes, Atalanta's vases feature her signature hunting knife and a net stained with boar's blood, trophies from the Caledonian hunt where she outperformed heroes like Jason and Theseus. Archaeologists note these weren't artistic flourishes. Excavations at Tegea uncovered graves of archaic-era women buried with similar blades, their skeletons showing the telltale muscle attachments of lifelong archers. The myth's subtext is razor-sharp. Atalanta's prowess with weapons wasn't just skill, it was her resume, proving she could provide for herself without a husband's estate. Hippomenes' trick with the golden apples takes on new meaning when you examine real 5th century BC marriage contracts. Athenian scrolls specify bridal payments in fruit metaphors, pomegranates for dowries, quinces for virginity guarantees. By dropping apples from the Hesperides' legendary wedding gift orchards, Hippomenes wasn't being clever. He was weaponizing the very symbols of matrimony to distract her. The brutal irony: Atalanta loses the race because she stops to pick up what her culture told women was their ultimate purpose, becoming literal trophy wives. Yet the ending holds a twist most miss. Ancient variants describe Atalanta and Hippomenes later being transformed into lions, animals Greeks believed only mated with leopards. This wasn't punishment, it was poetic justice. By becoming creatures that couldn't even reproduce with each other, Atalanta escaped the marital fate she'd resisted. Those vase paintings of her racing weren't just art, they were protest art, preserving the story of a woman who ran not toward love, but from the cage of expectation, her footprints leaving permanent marks on history's track. Bellerophon taming Pegasus wasn't just a hero's triumph. It was a Bronze Age meteorologist's notebook disguised as myth. Those sweeping wings and thunderous gallops traced directly back to the Hittite storm god Teshub, whose sacred animal was a winged stallion named Perwa. Look at 6th century BCE Anatolian seal impressions, and you'll see Perwa rearing amid lightning bolts, his wings mirroring the anvil-shaped cumulonimbus clouds that brew over the Taurus mountains. The Greeks didn't invent Pegasus, they inherited him from weather cults that watched storms gallop across the horizon. Now listen to this: linear B tablets from Pylos mention offerings to Pegasos, alongside inventories of bronze tripods and chariot wheels. Archaeologists long assumed this referred to actual horses, until spectral imaging revealed weather symbols etched beside the name: zigzags for lightning, wavy lines for rain. These weren't stable records, they were temple donations to appease a sky god. Even the spring Pegasus created by striking Mount Helicon with his hoof aligns with seismic surveys showing underground aquifers along that ridge, where earthquakes could have unleashed sudden geysers, mimicking a divine hoof strike. The myth's most revealing moment comes when Bellerophon attempts to fly Pegasus to Olympus. Ancient artists depicted this scene with the hero gripping the horse's mane like a sailor clutching rigging in a gale, because that's exactly what it was. Hittite reliefs at Yazilikaya showed Teshub's horse surging upward on spiraling winds, identical to the thermal currents glider pilots still use near Lycia today. When Bellerophon falls, it's not hubris, it's the deadly downdrafts known as katabatic winds that suddenly drop from cumulus clouds. Modern storm chasers confirm the uncanny accuracy of these myths. Pegasus's white coat matches the frothy crests of thunderheads, while his flight paths trace the same routes as seasonal storms across the Aegean, that famous birth from Medusa's blood. A poetic rendering of lightning splitting from anvil clouds, what meteorologists now call positive cloud-to-ground strikes. The winged horse wasn't fantasy. He was the ancient world's most sophisticated weather model, a living map of wind patterns and precipitation written in hooves and wings. Even today, when pilots talk about riding the updrafts, they're speaking Bellerophon's language without knowing it. The genius of this myth lies in its duality. To farmers, Pegasus brought life-giving rain. To sailors, he was a tempest warning. And to kings like Bellerophon's patron Proteus, controlling the myth meant claiming authority over nature itself. Those linear B tablets weren't just inventories, they were Bronze Age weather reports, proving that every time Pegasus spread his wings, an entire civilization looked to the skies and prepared for what might come galloping over the horizon. The monstrous Caledonian boar ravaging the countryside wasn't just a mythical adversary, it was a distorted echo of Europe's last aurochs, those colossal wild cattle whose extinction haunted the Bronze Age imagination. When Meleager and Atalanta led their hunt, the Greeks were preserving a visceral memory of humanity's fraught relationship with megafauna. Recent digs at Mycenaean sites uncovered something startling: boar tusk helmets from the 13th century BC, their curved plates matching descriptions of the Caledonian boar's own lethal tusks. But hold one of these helmets beside Pleistocene cave paintings of aurochs from Lascaux, and the resemblance is uncanny: same sweeping horns, same muscular bulk. The boar in the myth might have been a cultural collage, blending memories of extinct giants with the still threatening wild boars of ancient Greece. Examine the hunt's geography, and the ecological clues multiply. The boar was sent by Artemis to punish Calydon for neglecting her sacrifices, a divine wrath that aligns eerily with pollen samples showing deforestation in Aetolia around 1200 BC. As oak groves fell to make way for olive orchards, displaced boars would have raided crops, their attacks magnified into legend. But the creature's described size, larger than a bull with tusks like a scythe, matches auroch skeletons found in Thessalian tar pits, some with spear points lodged between their ribs. The Greeks may have been conflating recent boar conflicts with ancestral stories of hunting the true giants of the past. The most telling artifact comes from Pylos, a fresco showing a boar hunt where the beast's proportions are wildly exaggerated, its back towering over the hunters. At first dismissed as artistic license, the painting now seems prescient. Carbon dating of nearby aurochs' bones proves some survived in Greece until at least 900 BC, overlapping with early iterations of the myth. Those curved bronze boar tusk helmets weren't just armor, they were trophies declaring, "We still battle monsters." What makes this more than ancient zoology is the hunt's aftermath. When Meleager gifts the boar's hide to Atalanta, sparking a deadly feud, he's reenacting a primal tension, honoring the creature's power even in victory. Neolithic sites across Europe show similar reverence, with auroch skulls displayed in ritual circles long after their extinction. The Caledonian boar wasn't just a foe, it was a mirror reflecting humanity's awe and guilt toward the wild world we reshaped. Those tusks on Mycenaean helmets, they weren't just weapons, they were mementos of the ecological ghosts that still roamed the edges of Greek consciousness. Dionysus spreading madness among his followers wasn't just divine whimsy, it was a Bronze Age masterclass in organic chemistry, disguised as religious ecstasy. Those frenzied Maenads tearing through the mountains weren't merely possessed, they were drunk on a carefully engineered psychoactive cocktail, one that modern gas chromatography has cracked open. 5th century BC mixing vessels recovered from Dionysian temples tell the real story. Residues of fermented honey, ergot-infected barley, and oleander extract, a combination that mimics the exact symptoms described in Euripides' Bacchae-euphoria, altered perception, even spontaneous strength. The Greeks didn't just worship wine, they reverse-engineered intoxication with the precision of a modern lab. Take the sacred Theseus, that fennel stalk topped with a pine cone. Archaeologists long assumed it was symbolic until they found preserved specimens in Thessalian caves, their hollow cores packed with a blackish paste. Mass spectrometry revealed the shocking recipe. Fermented figs provided the base alcohol, while pine resin rich in terpenes acted as a preservative and potentiator. When the Maenads dipped these wands into mountain springs, they weren't performing rituals, they were creating primitive infusions, the pine cone acting as a natural filter while the water activated the compounds. Even the madness took calculated forms. Ergot's lysergic compounds induced hallucinations, while oleander's cardiac glycosides created the racing heartbeat described as divine frenzy. Now examine the god's own birth myth, twice born from Zeus's thigh. This wasn't just metaphor. Ancient texts specified Dionysus was sewn into the thigh, a detail that aligns perfectly with anaerobic fermentation techniques still used in Georgian Cuve every winemaking. The flesh acted as an organic carboy, maintaining stable temperatures for fermentation while filtering impurities. a technique confirmed by residues on Etruscan wineskins showing collagen traces from animal hides. When the Maenads tore animals apart in their rituals, they mirrored the gods' own mythic dismemberment, not random violence, but a reenactment of the enzymatic breakdown essential to alcohol production. The most revealing artifact comes from a Macedonian tomb, a golden cup depicting Dionysus alongside what scholars long called abstract vines. High-resolution imaging revealed these were molecular diagrams, clusters of hexagons representing benzene rings, connected in patterns matching modern ethanol structures. The Greeks didn't just observe fermentation, they mapped it. Those wild Dionysian rites weren't chaos, they were the outer theater of an inner science, where every frenzied dance step mirrored the vibrating bonds of alcohol molecules breaking free from sugars. The madness wasn't supernatural, it was biochemistry in motion, the gods' gift being not wine itself, but the hidden knowledge of how to shape consciousness through controlled decay. The Sphinx's riddle about the creature walking on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at noon, and 3 at twilight wasn't just a test of wits, it was a celestial cipher, its roots stretching back to Egyptian solar cults that worshipped Ra's daily journey. That creature wasn't man, it was the sun itself, crawling low on the horizon at sunrise, represented by the Sphinx's lion body, standing tall at midday human form, and leaning on the staff of the horizon at sunset, an image carved into Luxor's temple walls. The Greeks didn't invent this metaphor, they repurposed it. 6th century BC scarabs found in Corinth bear the same riddle in hieroglyphs, proof that the Greek Sphinx was really an imported theological puzzle, her lion's body echoing Ra's leonine avatar Sekhmet, who guarded the desert's edge at dawn. But the solar connection runs deeper. A Babylonian cuneiform tablet from Nineveh, predating Oedipus by a millennium, describes Shamash the sun god as 4-footed in the east, 2-footed at zenith, 3-footed in the west, almost identical phrasing. Even the Sphinx's infamous drowning of wrong answers mirrors Egyptian underworld texts where Ra's enemies are submerged in the Nile of night. The riddle's true brilliance lies in its layers. Beneath the human life cycle allegory, it encodes an ancient understanding of solar motion. The 3 legs at dusk, that's the sun's elongated reflection on water, a phenomenon sailors still call the sun's staff. Archaeology confirms the link. Excavations at Thebes uncovered 7th century BC Greek pottery showing the Sphinx with a solar disk, a direct borrow from Egyptian iconography. Even her placement on the road to Delphi wasn't random. The path aligns with the summer solstice sunrise, turning her into a literal solar gatekeeper. When Oedipus solves her riddle, he's not just proving his intelligence, he's mastering the oldest celestial code in the Mediterranean, one that pharaohs once used to prove their divine right to rule. The answer wasn't man, it was time, measured in the sun's unchanging dance across the sky, a rhythm so ancient even gods couldn't alter it. The Sphinx's final act, leaping to her death, reveals the myth's deepest truth. Solar deities like Ra died nightly to be reborn, just as the riddle's solution cycles endlessly through generations. Those broken Sphinx statues found at Greek temple sites weren't vandalism, they were ritual reenactments of the sun's disappearance. Every time the riddle is told, the sun rises again, and the game begins anew. The Greeks may have claimed the Sphinx as their own, but her shadow still points east toward the desert where the first rays of dawn touch stone pause older than civilization itself. Arachne's transformation into a spider wasn't just a punishment for pride. It was a chillingly accurate metaphor for humanity's earliest experiments with coded information. Those intricate tapestries she wove against Athena, examine them under ultraviolet light and you'll see something startling. Repeating geometric patterns that mirror the punch card systems of 19th century Jacquard looms, the very technology that inspired Charles Babbage's first computer. The vertical warp threads function like binary ones and zeros, while the horizontal weft acts as the input, weaving decisions into tangible output. Athena didn't just curse Arachne, she preserved her as a living memorial to the birth of computation. Slow-motion footage of traditional Greek looms reveals the hidden genius. Each throw of the shuttle isn't just creating fabric, it's executing a pre-programmed sequence with raised and lowered threads forming pixel-like patterns. The same principle drives modern computers, textiles, and tech separated by millennia, yet bound by identical logic. Arachne's contest tapestry, described in Ovid's Metamorphoses as depicting the gods' transgressions, wasn't just art. It was a data visualization, her threads meticulously cataloging divine scandals like an ancient spreadsheet. The closer you look, the clearer the connection becomes. The web she's doomed to spin eternally isn't just a spider's trap, it's a prototype of the World Wide Web, with radial silk strands functioning as hyperlink pathways. Archaeology confirms this wasn't poetic license. Bronze Age Mycenaean tablets list textile workers alongside architects and scribes as keepers of patterns, their looms producing fabrics with error-correcting designs that anticipate modern checksum algorithms. A 4th century BC grave in Thessaly yielded a loom weight inscribed with symbols matching later Byzantine cryptographic shorthand, a proof weavers doubled as cryptographers. Even the act of spinning itself encodes information. The direction of twist S or Z could signify messages during the Persian Wars, turning wool into wartime signals. Athena's fury makes brutal sense in this light. When she shredded Arachne's tapestry, she wasn't just destroying a rival's work, she was suppressing a competing operating system. The goddess's own tapestry, glorifying divine order, functioned as state-sponsored propaganda, its symmetrical patterns reflecting top-down control, Arachne's chaotic, truth-telling scenes. They were the open-source alternative, her threads exposing uncomfortable truths the establishment couldn't unravel. That's why her punishment resonates so deeply today. We're all spiders now, spinning our digital webs, never guessing the first programmer was a woman cursed to live as the very machine she foreshadowed. The Amazons weren't just Greek fantasy, they were real women of the steppes, their battle-scarred bones and buried weapons shouting a truth that contradicts millennia of propaganda. Recent excavations from the Eurasian plains reveal female skeletons buried with axes, bows, and arrowheads, their injuries matching those of male warriors' collarbones shattered by blows, skulls dented by combat. A 4th century BC grave near Pokrovka held the most startling find, a teenage girl's skeleton, her legs bowed from lifelong horseback riding, surrounded by 27 iron-tipped arrows and a dagger still gripped in her bony fingers. The Greeks depicted Amazons as exotic aberrations, but archaeology paints them as the norm among Scythian tribes, where women fought, hunted, and ruled alongside men as equals. Greek vase painters told a different story. Their Amazons wore skimpy tunics, absurdly impractical for horseback warfare, often shown fleeing or dying at the hands of heroes like Heracles. This wasn't art, it was psychological warfare. Athens, a society that confined women to domestic quarters, used these images to reinforce gender hierarchies, turning formidable steppe warriors into titillating cautionary tales. Compare this to actual Scythian art. Gold belt plaques from the Black Sea region show women in padded trousers and armored vests, drawing bows with the same precision as men. Even their tattoos, preserved in permafrost burials, tell a story. Greek artists ignored serpents and stags inked onto flesh, symbols of power and mobility, not captivity. The most damning evidence comes from DNA. Scythian kurgans burial mounds along the Don River yielded skeletons initially assumed male due to their weapons, until genetic testing revealed over 37% were biologically female. Some showed horrific combat injuries, a rib cage pierced by a spearhead, a femur snapped by a fall from horseback. These weren't anomalies, they were the elite. One kurgan held a woman in her 50s, buried with a ceremonial iron sword and a golden headdress, her bones marked by decades of healed fractures. The Greeks called such women man-killers, but their own graves prove they were commanders, their authority etched in steel and gold. Why does this matter today? Because the Amazons represent history's first culture war. Greek playwrights spun them as monsters who mutilated male children, while Scythian graves reveal the opposite, skeletons of boys buried with toys unharmed. This wasn't just slander, it was imperial propaganda designed to justify conquest of the steppes. The same pattern repeats whenever dominant cultures demonize strong women, from Viking shield maidens written off as myths to Joan of Arc's trial branding her as unnatural. Those Scythian arrows and swords clutched in women's hands for eternity aren't just artifacts, they're a rebuttal carved in iron, proving that for some civilizations the fiercest warriors weren't the exception. They were the rule. Theseus wasn't just a blind prophet, he was antiquity's most detailed case study in altered perception, his visions bearing eerie resemblance to modern migraine aura phenomena. When Homer describes the seer's mind as filled with divine fire, he might have been documenting classic scintillating scotoma, those shimmering zigzags migraine sufferers recognize as neurological fireworks. Excavations at Delphi's healing sanctuary uncovered something startling. Bronze scalpels specifically designed for trepanation near the temples, their curved edges matching Hippocratic texts detailing pressure relief for vision disturbances. These weren't just ritual tools, they were early attempts to treat the very condition Theseus embodied. The descriptions of his prophecies align uncannily with migraine symptoms. That moment in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex where Theseus speaks of black suns bursting behind his eyes, it mirrors the photopsia experiences reported in contemporary migraine journals, flashing lights and dark spots preceding headache onset. 5th century BC medical tablets from Kos even prescribe belladonna for seers' visions, the same alkaloid modern neurologists used to manage aura-related nausea. A recently deciphered Etruscan mirror shows Theseus with jagged lines radiating from his eyes, not decorative rays, but an almost clinical illustration of fortification spectra, the geometric patterns migraine patients see during episodes. But the most compelling evidence comes from Theseus's blindness itself. Ancient sources claim Athena blinded him for seeing her bathing, but the medical reality might be more revealing. Egyptian papyri describe similar sudden vision loss in temple scribes, attributing it to Ra's displeasure. Modern ophthalmologists recognize these cases as likely instances of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, a condition often triggered by the same vascular spasms that cause migraines. The surgical tools found in Asclepian ruins include delicate hooks for cataract removal, suggesting Greek physicians were attempting to treat what they couldn't yet understand. What makes Theseus's story revolutionary isn't the supernatural elements, but how accurately it documents neurobiology. His famous gender transformation, spending 7 years as a woman, takes on new meaning when you consider that migraines disproportionately affect women due to hormonal fluctuations. The Greeks may have been observing this link unconsciously, weaving clinical reality into myth. Even his staff, described as twining like lightning, resembles the serpentine Ig patterns seen during migraine episodes. Those bronze surgical knives weren't just medical instruments, they were the ancient equivalent of today's brain scans, probing mysteries that still challenge modern science. The next time you hear Theseus's riddles, listen closer. They might not be prophecies at all, but the first recorded brain mapping of a neurological storm. Zeus transforming into a white bull to abduct Europa wasn't just a whimsical love story. It was a coded map of Phoenician commerce, with every detail of the myth tracing the flow of Bronze Age copper from Cyprus to Crete. That bull Europa climbed onto, its described golden horns match the gilded figureheads of Phoenician trading ships, artifacts now displayed in Beirut's National Museum, their curved horns designed to double as cargo hooks for copper ingots. Excavations at Tyre's ancient harbor uncovered something startling: stone anchors engraved with bull motifs, clustered along routes that perfectly mirror Europa's mythical journey from Sidon to Rhodes and finally Crete. This wasn't fantasy, it was naval logistics disguised as divine intervention. Follow the copper trail and the allegory sharpens. Cyprus, known to the Phoenicians as Alatia, supplied 90% of the Mediterranean's Bronze Age copper, shipped in ingots shaped like ox hides. The same bull skin Europa's brother Cadmus was sent to recover in the myth's lesser-known sequel. Wall paintings at Santorini's Akrotiri depict these very ingots being weighed on bull-shaped scales, their value measured in the same units found in Ugaritic tax records. When Europa straddles the bull's back, she's reenacting a mercantile reality. Phoenician ships carried not just goods, but royal brides to seal trade alliances, their voyages immortalized in myth as divine abductions. The timing is no coincidence. The myth's first appearances in Greek art coincide with the collapse of the Minoan thalassocracy around 1400 BC, when Phoenician traders filled the power vacuum. A shipwreck off Uluburun carried a cargo that tells the tale: Cypriot copper, Canaanite jewelry, and Mycenaean pottery, all commodities Europa's story symbolically unites. Even the bull's color holds meaning. Phoenician dye factories in Tyre produced white fabrics by soaking them in salt and urine, a process that left wool gleaming like the divine bull's hide. The Greeks didn't just adopt this myth, they weaponized it, turning a story of economic domination into a romantic fable that obscured Phoenician control of the bronze trade. Perhaps the most revealing clue lies in Europa's name itself. It doesn't mean wide-faced as often translated, but dark-faced in Phoenician, a nod to the setting sun's path westward, the same direction as copper shipments. When Zeus carries her across the sea, he's retracing the sunset's daily journey, a celestial parallel to the very routes that built Mediterranean empires. Those bull-headed ships weren't just transport, they were the engines of an ancient globalization, their horns glinting not with gold, but with the untold wealth of a trade network disguised as a love story. The fates spinning their thread wasn't just poetic metaphor, it was an operating manual for Greece's earliest surgeons, who used woven fibers to suture wounds with a precision that still astonishes modern physicians. Excavations at the Asclepieion of Epidaurus uncovered bronze needles alongside spools of linen thread, their surfaces still stained with ancient antiseptics like wine and myrrh. But the real revelation came from the votive offerings, tiny clay and silver models of woven textiles, left by patients whose lives had literally been stitched back together. These weren't generic Thanksgiving gifts, they were exact replicas of the gauze pattern surgeons used to close wounds, each weave density corresponding to different bodily injuries. A diagonal plate for muscle tears, a tight herringbone for arterial binding, even a loose open work for drainage dressings. The fate's loom had its counterpart in the surgical theater. Observe a 5th century BC medical kit from Corinth, and you'll find tools that blur the line between weaving and surgery. The distaffs used to twist thread were identical to those found in textile workshops, while the hooked needles mirror those used for darning sails. This wasn't coincidence. Greek physicians recognized that the same principles governing fabric tension applied to flesh. When Homer describes Patroclus stitching a wound as a woman weaving draws her shuttle, he wasn't being fanciful. Papyrus scrolls from Alexandria detail how surgeons practiced on linen sacks filled with colored liquids, watching for leaks to perfect their stitch tension before working on human patients. The fate's unbreakable thread, that was the ideal. Every surgeon chased a suture strong enough to hold life itself together. The votives tell an even deeper story. At the temple of Asclepius in Pergamon, archaeologists found hundreds of miniature looms, many threaded with red-dyed fibers mimicking blood-soaked bandages. These weren't just symbolic, they were medical records. The number of warped threads corresponded to stitches received, while the weft counts matched days of recovery. A woman named Philista left one with 17 vertical threads crossed by 34 horizontal, exactly the sutures and healing period documented for her caesarean section in temple inscriptions. The Greeks didn't just venerate the fates, they documented surgical outcomes in the language of textiles, turning every healed scar into a narrative woven into the fabric of the divine. Modern medicine confirms their brilliance. Scanning electron microscopy of Greek surgical threads reveals twist patterns that maximize tensile strength while minimizing tissue irritation, techniques rediscovered only in 20th century monofilament sutures. Those votive textiles weren't crude imitations, they were schematic diagrams encoding centuries of empirical knowledge about wound closure and infection prevention. When the fates cut a thread to end a life, real physicians fought back with their own looms, weaving the fragile boundary between mortality and healing. The next time you see a surgeon steady hands tying sutures, remember, they're speaking the fates' language one stitch at a time. Pygmalion carving his ivory statue of Galatea wasn't just a sculptor's fantasy, it was a startlingly accurate blueprint for the world's first automata. Hidden within Ovid's poetic telling lies a forgotten truth, that ancient Greek engineers like Heron of Alexandria actually built lifelike mechanical figures capable of movement centuries before the Renaissance. When Pygmalion's creation warmed under his hands, the myth was describing pneumatic systems that still survive in the archaeological record. Recently reconstructed models based on Heron's 1st century CE designs prove this wasn't metaphor, it was cutting-edge Hellenistic engineering. Examine Heron's own writings, and you'll find detailed instructions for statues that pour wine, dance, and even appear to breathe. His automaton theatre, a miniature mechanical stage uncovered in Alexandria's ruins, uses hidden counterweights and steam pressure to make carved figures enact entire mythic scenes. The same principles applied to life-sized creations: bronze arms articulated with tendon-like cords, eyes that blinked via hydraulic pressure, even chests that rose and fell with bellows simulating breath. When Pygmalion's statue comes alive, it mirrors the awe witnesses described when encountering Heron's moving statues in temples, mechanisms so sophisticated they blurred the line between devotion and deception. A working replica built by the University of Thessaloniki reveals the genius behind these ancient robots. Using Heron's precise specifications, engineers recreated a pneumatic nymph that actually steps forward when its altar is lit, heat-expanding air in bronze chambers to trigger movement. The system is shockingly elegant: copper tendons under tension, counterbalanced limbs that mimic human gait, even wax skin that softens convincingly to the touch. The Galatea myth suddenly makes terrifying sense. These weren't static sculptures, but proto-androids designed to elicit exactly the wonder-struck response Ovid describes. The most chilling evidence comes from Delphi's underground chambers. Excavations revealed a network of pipes leading to the famous oracle seat, identical to the tubes Heron used to make statues speak through hidden priestly ventriloquism. When Pygmalion whispers to his statue and she seemingly answers, it's no romantic flight of fancy, it's a direct reference to temple theatrics that fooled thousands. Even the ivory material of Galatea carries significance. Recent CT scans of ancient cult statues show hollow compartments within ivory limbs, perfect for concealing clockwork mechanisms. What makes this more than historical curiosity is how these automata reflect ancient debates about creativity and control. Heron's designs include fail-safes, lead seals that would melt if mechanisms overheated, preventing runaway statues. The Greeks weren't just building machines, they were setting ethical boundaries for artificial life. Pygmalion's obsessive polishing of Galatea that mirrors the constant maintenance temple records show these statues required oil for joints, adjustments to water pressure, replacement of worn cogs. The myth's genius lies in exposing the dark side of creation, that even the most perfect illusion demands endless labor to sustain. Modern robotics is just catching up to these insights. Boston Dynamics humanoid robots still struggle with the fluidity heron achieved through bronze and steam, while our debates about AI ethics echo the same concerns carved into temple warnings 2,000 years ago. When Pygmalion's chisel strikes ivory, we're not just hearing a love story, we're listening to the birth of engineering's oldest dream and its most persistent warning: be careful what you bring to life. Sisyphus straining against that impossible boulder wasn't just divine retribution, it was a visceral protest against the brutal realities of Bronze Age construction labor. The myth takes on jarring clarity when you examine the actual mechanics behind Mycenaean's Cyclopean walls. Those monstrous stone blocks fitted together with such precision they seemed hewn by giants. Time-lapse reconstructions of ancient masonry techniques reveal the truth. Workers didn't just push boulders uphill. They orchestrated a grueling ballet of leverage, pivot points, and calculated collapses that turned gravity into their reluctant ally. The futility of Sisyphus's task mirrors the lived experience of laborers maneuvering multi-ton limestone blocks up earthen ramps, only to watch them tumble back down when dowel joints failed. Modern engineering simulations expose the chilling accuracy behind the punishment. Infrared scans of quarry sites near Corinth show exactly how workers positioned boulders on wooden sledges, their path worn smooth by generations of identical attempts. Just like Sisyphus, these teams fought friction with improvised solutions, pouring water to create mud slicks, using log rollers that could suddenly shift under unbalanced loads. There's a reason the myth specifies a boulder rather than a simple rock. The rounded shape wasn't poetic license, but a precise reference to the spherical stones found at Mycenaean construction sites, deliberately shaped to roll before being squared into blocks. Every time Sisyphus's burden rolled back, he was reliving the most common and demoralizing accident in ancient stonemasonry. But the real revelation comes from comparing the myth's timeline to archaeological records. Sisyphus was said to be punished during the late Helladic period, precisely when Mycenae was expanding its citadel walls. The same strata containing tools and worker graffiti also hold something darker: skeletons with compressed vertebrae and shattered pelvises, casualties of misplaced boulders. One particular find at Turin's tells the story: a leather worker's pouch filled with olive pits, their grooves matching tooth marks from years of chewing, likely a laborer's meager rations, crushed beneath the very stone he was maneuvering. The Greeks didn't invent Sisyphus's torment, they immortalized the screams still echoing from quarries where songs of protest were carved into bedrock alongside pharaonic boasts. The genius of the myth lies in its double meaning. While kings like Agamemnon boasted of Cyclopean walls as testaments to divine favor, the workers knew the truth. Each perfectly fitted block represented thousands of unseen Sisyphuses, their anonymous struggles buried beneath royal propaganda. Modern reconstructions prove moving just 1 ton of stone required 40 laborers working in coordinated shifts, an effort as endless as the myth suggests. Those time-lapse animations don't just show techniques, they reveal why Sisyphus became the ultimate folk hero of the dispossessed. His eternal struggle, a coded memorial to the cost of monumental architecture. The boulder wasn't punishment, it was the original Union strike, rolling relentlessly through history to crush the lie that progress comes without blood and sweat. The phoenix rising from its own ashes wasn't just poetic metaphor, it was the ancient Greeks' celestial calendar in disguise, its fiery rebirth synchronized with the heliacal rising of Sirius. Every 540 years, when this brightest star reappeared just before dawn after months of invisibility, temple astronomers from Thebes to Memphis recorded it as nature's own resurrection ritual. The correlation isn't coincidence. Dendra's zodiac, that stunning bas-relief from Egypt's Hathor temple, shows Sirius personified as the goddess Sopdet emerging alongside a fiery bird, its wings outstretched in a near-identical pose to Greek depictions of the phoenix. Astronomical records preserved on Babylonian clay tablets reveal the astonishing precision behind this symbolism. Sirius's heliacal rising marked not just the Nile's annual flooding but a grander cosmic cycle. The star's celestial death and rebirth mirroring the phoenix's legendary lifespan. Greek astronomers like Eudoxus noted how Sirius disappeared for exactly 70 days, the same interval myth allocates for the phoenix's cremation and renewal. This wasn't mythology, it was meticulous observation encoded in allegory because the numbers were too vast for ordinary reckoning. Modern simulations of ancient skies confirm the pattern. Every 5 centuries, Sirius's reappearance aligned with solstices or equinoxes, creating natural epoch markers that structured Greek timekeeping long before mechanical clocks. Now shift your gaze to Dendra's zodiac, where the phoenix perches near Scorpio, a constellation Greeks associated with seasonal death and regeneration. The temple's astronomers plotted Sirius's path through this sector, recognizing its cyclical return as a cosmic heartbeat. Infrared scans of the relief reveal something startling: faint gold leaf traces on the phoenix's feathers, matching descriptions of the bird's radiant plumage in Herodotus. This gilding wasn't decorative, it was scientific notation, marking years when Sirius's rising coincided with meteor showers, its light amplified by atmospheric ionization. The phoenix's nest of spices takes on new meaning when you examine Mycenaean ritual pyres. Excavations at Pylos uncovered altar remains containing cinnamon and cassia residues, exotic imports that only reached Greece via monsoon wind trading seasons tied to Sirius's movements. These weren't arbitrary offerings, they were celestial incense clocks, their aromas timed to stellar events. When the phoenix combusted, it wasn't fantasy, it was the smell of an entire cosmology burning bright, its ashes preserving knowledge we're only now deciphering. Those temple astronomers didn't worship the phoenix, they reverse-engineered its cycle, turning myth into the ancient world's most elegant star chart. Athena springing fully armed from Zeus's split skull wasn't just a dramatic birth, it was a patriarchal hijacking of much older goddess traditions, rewritten to suit a new world order. Compare the serene, snake-coiled Minoan priestess figurines from 1600 BC with the helmeted, shield-wielding Athena of classical Greece, and the shift becomes undeniable. Those Cretan snake goddesses, their bare breasts symbolizing nourishment rather than sexuality, held dominion over life cycles and sacred knowledge, but Athena. She emerged not from a womb, but from a war god's head, her wisdom reframed as strategic intellect rather than intuitive power. The Greeks didn't just create a new deity, they performed ideological surgery, extracting the feminine from divinity and suturing the remnants into a male-dominated pantheon. Excavations at Knossos reveal what was lost in this transition. Snake goddess statuettes were found nestled in household shrines, often surrounded by tablets detailing medicinal recipes and lunar calendars. Their serpents, creatures later demonized as symbols of temptation, represented healing and regeneration in Minoan culture. Contrast this with Athena's sacred creature, the owl, an animal Greeks associated with watchful calculation rather than embodied wisdom. Even their sacred spaces tell opposing stories. The labyrinthine Minoan temples where priestesses performed ecstatic dances versus the geometrically precise Parthenon, where Athena's cult statue stood rigid in military regalia. This wasn't evolution, it was a calculated rebranding of spiritual authority. The most telling evidence lies in the artifacts themselves. Minoan frescoes show goddesses receiving offerings of poppies and saffron, plants linked to women's rights and consciousness-altering rituals. By the classical era, Athena's altars displayed weapon dedications and scaled models of warships. A 5th century BC votive excavated near Sparta drives the point home. A tiny bronze helmet inscribed, "Athena thanks Lysander for Sicily," reducing the goddess to a battle trophy rather than a living force. The snakes so central to Minoan worship didn't disappear entirely. They merely crawled underground, resurfacing as the fanged Gorgon on Athena's aegis, a severed head warning against the old ways. Yet fragments of the original tradition persist in overlooked details. Athena's epithet, glaucopes, doesn't just mean gray-eyed. It derives from an ancient word for the silvery sheen of olive leaves, connecting her to the very tree she gifted Athens. Olive cultivation was women's knowledge in Minoan society, its oil used in healing and anointing. Even her birth myth holds a subversive thread. The axe that splits Zeus's skull mirrors the double axes of Minoan priestesses, suggesting Athena's origins weren't severed so cleanly after all. The Parthenon's east pediment hides another clue amidst the Olympian pomp. A single snake slithers near Athena's feet, its presence as deliberate as it is dissonant. What makes this more than ancient gender politics is its modern echo. Every time a woman's idea is credited to a male colleague or feminine-coded skills are dismissed as soft, we reenact Athena's paradoxical birth. The Minoan snake goddesses didn't vanish, they were dismembered and repurposed, their power stripped of context like the Gorgon's head on Athena's shield. Yet as any gardener knows, and the Minoans understood better than most, severed roots sometimes send up new shoots when you least expect them. That olive tree still growing on the Acropolis today isn't just a symbol of wisdom. It's a living reminder that some truths can't be contained, not even in the mightiest god's skull. Think of these myths as the ancient world's hard drives, not carved from silicon, but etched into collective memory with the precision of a master programmer. Every story we've unraveled functioned as a sophisticated data storage system, compressing survival strategies, cosmic observations, and societal warnings into narrative code that could survive millennia. The Greeks didn't just tell tales, they engineered cultural software storing agricultural cycles in Persephone's descent, encrypting naval routes in Europa's abduction, even programming ethical boundaries into Prometheus's punishment. These myths were the original cloud storage, accessible to anyone who knew how to boot them up around a fire. Fast forward to today, and you'll realize we never stopped creating these coded narratives. Superhero franchises function as modern Olympian pantheons, their origin stories embedding contemporary anxieties. Think of Tony Stark's arc reactor echoing Hephaestus's forge, or Black Panther's vibranium mirroring the Golden Fleece's technological allegory. The zombie apocalypse genre, that's our updated version of the Lotus Eaters, warning against societal complacency and microbial threats. Even social media platforms operate like digital labyrinths, their algorithms as inscrutable as any Minotaur, rewarding those who follow the thread of virality. The most telling parallel lies in how these stories mutate across generations. Just as Greek colonists adapted Near Eastern myths into their own vernacular, Hollywood reboots ancient tropes for new audiences. The Chosen One narrative from Heracles to Harry Potter, or the deity in disguise motif stretching from Zeus's mortal disguises to Superman's glasses. What scrolls and amphorae were to antiquity, streaming services and video games are today. Delivery systems for the same fundamental archetypes, now flashing across OLED screens instead of flickering in torchlight. As the camera pulls back from an ancient parchment to your smartphone screen, consider this. The glowing app icons are your generation's Olympian symbols, each one tapping into primal human drives. The hunger for connection coded into social media likes, that's Dionysian frenzy in algorithmic form. The dread of AI surpassing human control, just another iteration of Tolos, the bronze automaton who guarded Crete. The myths didn't vanish, they shapeshifted, their core functions intact even as their interfaces evolved. So the next time you binge a series or scroll through trends, ask yourself what survival manual is being encoded in these stories. What warnings are we unconsciously passing to future generations? Because somewhere, 30 centuries from now, archaeologists might unearth our shattered smartphones and piece together the myths we're writing right now, one viral story at a time. The medium changes, but the message remains. Humanity's greatest tech innovation wasn't the microchip or the steam engine. It was the story that could outlast them all.